Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce to you Dr. Lane Hinchcliffe. Lane Hinchcliffe is a South Australian-based medical practitioner with a strong interest in adolescent health. His experience includes paediatrics, men's health, mental health and counselling, and he established a family practice in Glenelg in 2014. Lane is a regular speaker at Adelaide high schools where he runs sessions for teenagers on health awareness. Lane is also a talented musician and writer. Originally studying composition and piano performance at Sydney Conservatorium of Music, Lane changed his career path to medicine, though never lost his love for the arts. At the age of 17, he started writing a musical about the Battle of Fromelles in France in 1916 called The Front. 3 years later, he completed the first full version of the work, and it was staged in Sydney as a low-budget production over 3 nights. In 2011, he took some time off from his full-time medical career and was fortunate to have the chance to work in performing arts again. Lane has had the opportunity to meet and work with a number of industry professionals, and this opened the door to the musical being revisited. The timing was of particular interest, as of course we were approaching the Anzac centenary. As major inspiration of his final work was the discovery of mass graves at Pheasant Wood in France in 2008. At the time, the gravesite contained the remains of hundreds of nameless soldiers. The narrative is divided between 1916 and 2010, conveying the story from 2 perspectives, and this gives it a contemporary flavour. The show made its world premiere performance as a semi-staged concert at the Adelaide Festival Centre on the 8th of June this year as part of the Adelaide Cabaret Festival. Rotarians and guests, please welcome Dr. Lane Hinchcliffe.
That was actually an excerpt of one of the songs from the show, and I have to embarrass somebody, well, actually give credit to our beautiful vocalist who's actually with us today. Mr. Brian Gilbertson was the singer on that recording. Probably a good time to also apologise to Brian, because I didn't realise I'd see him here today, and I think I frightened him when I said to him, "Oh, you're singing today?" And he said, "What?" Ladies and gentlemen, a number of months ago I was interviewed on radio in the lead up to the Cabaret Festival. Before we went on air, the radio host asked me a question which I wasn't quite expecting. He said, with about 30 seconds to go, "How do I introduce you?" Are you a doctor with an interest in music, or a musician and writer who just is a part-time doctor? To which I sort of stuttered and said, I have to have a think about how you answer that. The reality is, I've enjoyed two very different careers, and both have been equally important to my journey as a human being. But interestingly, both are also very reflective of my journey as a human being. Whilst it might appear a rather strange combination to have worked in the arts and in the medical field, these two paths have actually been very closely connected to me by an underlying passion for the human story. Ladies and gentlemen, it is with great pleasure and a huge privilege that I've been invited to speak today. Thank you very much for having me. Today of all days being Remembrance Day. One of my fondest childhood memories is actually in 1990, Anzac Day. I was 7 years old. On that day, I accompanied my grandfather, Keith Hinchcliffe, to Martin Place in Sydney, where we joined his mates in the Anzac Day March. 13 years later, Anzac Day 2003, we once again returned to Martin Place for what would be my grandfather's final march. Only this time, I wasn't to walk beside him, but rather push him in a wheelchair. Keith, my grandfather, was 19 when he joined the Royal Australian Air Force in March 1942. Ironically, he was colourblind, and so his first attempt to join the Air Force as a pilot was unsuccessful. Instead, he was allowed to join the radar. His first posting was at the 37 radio station in Milne Bay, New Guinea. Growing up, I was so interested in his stories, and I would sit for hours asking him more and more about his experience in New Guinea. My favourite story was about how he survived malaria. So allegedly he was told by one of the doctors who took his temperature, "Whoa, 105. Don't worry, mate, I've seen him live at 106. I was fortunate to share a very close relationship with my grandfather, who, I would later discover, battled with many traumatic memories from his years at war. In fact, it wasn't until after he died that I learnt that he only ever joined the Anzac Day March on two occasions, once in 1990 with his 7-year-old grandson by his side, and once in 2003 with his 20-year-old grandson pushing him. 13 years on, that day, Anzac Day 2003, it was certainly a very different experience for me. A beautiful sunny morning in April, and the march itself was exactly as I'd remembered it. What was different, however, was my grandfather. Now, perhaps it was because I was older. Perhaps it was because he did not have to hide any emotion any longer. But for whatever reason, Keith was still in quiet during the march, with tears rolling down his face. It's fair to say that I developed a passion and an interest in the Anzac-related history because of my grandfather. From hearing his stories firsthand, witnessing his pain with my own eyes, and I guess most importantly, experiencing the effects that his traumatic journey has had on our family. The effects of war transcends generations. This was my inspiration for writing The Front. Now, interestingly, one of my other strong connections I share with my grandfather was a love of music. My grandparents owned a beautiful old piano, and I'm told, allegedly, when I was a young child, that I would sit at the keys and play all the time. Random notes, by the way, and apparently I thought it sounded lovely. Although, when I was 4, I did, according to my mother, teach myself to play Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, which was, yes, as it is now, my favourite song, of course. Now, this may have been a catalyst, but my parents decided to find me a piano teacher, and this is where it all began. As far back as I can remember, music has been a major part of my life. Over the years, I've had the opportunity to attend a wonderful high school with an elite music program. My passion for music has grown and grown. Every time I would perform, my family would be there, and in one person in particular, my grandfather, Keith. Now, somewhere along the journey, and I can't exactly pinpoint where, I became fascinated with writing my own music. Over the years, I started to write instrumental works until one day, an idea came to me about an Australian musical theatre piece that told the story of our Anzac men and women. Yes, I wrote the first song for The Front when I was 17. So, let's skip ahead 16 years. What is this piece, The Front, about? The story is based around the Battle of Fromelles on the 19th of July 1916. Now, historically, this was a very significant battle for our country, and particularly for South Australians, as the 32nd Battalion, 8th Brigade, was raised in Adelaide and suffered one of the most horrendous losses of any battalion for World War I. Not only was Fromelles the first battle in which Australia saw any action in France during World War I, but it remains known today as the bloodiest 24-hour period in Anzac history. Over 5,500 Australian casualties in just several hours. What I have found quite interesting on my journey is that whilst many people know of Gallipoli, as we should, being such a significant battle and campaign, there is much that is not known about the events that occurred in France. Statistically, Australia suffered more casualties in France than in Gallipoli, often in single battles, in fact. Yet the events seem to be less known about, and certainly a lot of young people I've encountered have never heard of Fromelles. But what is particularly fascinating for me is the contemporary events surrounding this battle. As was said before, in 2008, the discovery of mass graves took place in Pheasant Wood, just near the original battlefields. These graves have been found to contain hundreds of previously unidentified Australian soldiers, many of whom have subsequently been identified by DNA testing and now have a named grave in Fromelles. And so the story of the front actually begins in 2010, with an elderly man visiting the battlefields of Fromelles. His name is Arthur. Arthur is accompanied by his son and his grandson. As they journey through the modern-day battlefields of Fromelles, the audience is connected to a series of stories across a 100-year time frame, which all happen on stage simultaneously. In particular, a story unfolds in 1916, following a group of South Australian men and women who enlist. The men are led by a middle-aged man called Frank Holloway, a school headmaster who leaves behind a beautiful wife before she learns that she is unexpectedly pregnant. Ultimately, in tragic turn of events, Frank perishes trying to save another soldier in the Battle of Fromelles, as did so many others. As the storylines unfold, we discover that Arthur, in 2010, is the son that Frank never knew he had. Almost a century later, his body has been identified in the mass graves at Pheasant Wood. Frank's gravestone is now met by 3 subsequent generations of family, his son, grandson, and great-grandson. War transcends generations. Ladies and gentlemen, I can only say I've had an amazing journey, and as you no doubt will have gathered, I did not go on to pursue and complete my degree in music when I left school. In fact, I moved to Adelaide and commenced study in a new area of medicine. What a wonderful experience this has been. I have no regrets, and over the years I have been very fortunate to be able to balance my love of the arts with a love of the medical profession. Now I do a lot of work in the area of adolescent health, and actually my interest, I guess, in that human story and working individually with patients to understand their backgrounds and what brings them to see us is very much the same passion that drove me to create this story, The Front, in the first place. The Front premiered at the Adelaide Cabaret Festival this year, and I can only say it was overwhelming. One of the newspapers published the most beautiful review. The reviewer said, "They believe my grandfather would have been very proud." I could not agree more. I hope the work will have another chance to see the stage. We have applied for some federal funding in the hope to stage a production of the work in 2017. At this stage, I guess I can only say, watch this space. In the meantime, it was my pleasure to be able to share with you a song from the show. This song was recorded and set to images courtesy of the Australian War Memorial and the New South Wales Library. This video was actually used to open the Adelaide Dawn service in 2013. Ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion today, I can only re-emphasise the beautiful words we heard earlier when we said the oath and then had our minutes of silence. We will remember them, lest we forget.
Thank you, Lane. It's certainly obvious that music and medicine mix, and I've seen that over many, many years. What I'd like to know is, what is the future for you? Is it music? Is it medicine? Is it still a combination?
Yeah, I think I would never... I don't think I would ever want to be without one or the other. Certainly, I intend to continue to work and to enjoy my career as a GP and doing a lot of the work we're doing in the medical profession. But I want to be able to maintain some work in the arts as well. I don't think, in practicality, it's something I can do all the time, but normally every couple of years I have the opportunity to be involved in something major, such as this show this year, and some of the other big festivals as well.
Excellent. Are there any questions from the audience today? David.
Might as well go to the microphone, yeah. I was just wondering, Lane, if you could tell us what the exact plans are for your next steps with your musical, what you're hoping to happen, and what the challenges that are in front of you.
Yeah. And
particularly with the view to the 100th anniversary next year, is it?
That's right, yeah. That's a very good question. The 100-year anniversary of Fromelles, the Battle of Fromelles, will be in July next year. And at this stage, it's our hope that we will be able to see a fully staged version of the work the following year. We did look at doing something in July next year, which would be great for the coinciding with the exact anniversary. But there's obviously a lot that happens in Adelaide around June, July, particularly with Cabaret Festival and different festivals, and venue availability can be a little bit difficult. However, the current plan is that we hope to be able to stage a short season of the work here in Adelaide, probably around Anzac Day in 2017, and then with the opportunity to take the show on the road, tour to some regional areas, and hopefully maybe even interstate as well. One of the biggest challenges we obviously face all the time is funding. From new works are obviously a risky investment for anybody. We've been very fortunate to have wonderful community support and have been able to do a lot of our early development of this show through fundraising and community development in that way. In more recent times, we've also been very fortunate to have some support from local DVA with a grant coming through, and hopefully we'll be able to do the same with the federal arts. But it's certainly my hope that the show will be seen as a more complete stage version for a longer run in 2017. I think the stage where I'm at now, I really want people to hear the story, and particularly our younger generations as well. If we do get the show successfully funded to be able to produce it at that time, it's our intention to actually have specific performances designated for school students, so that schools can actually bring their students and be involved and actually use that as something within their sort of educational program as well.
Is there still the opportunity for people to support your project?
Absolutely. We have a couple of different ways in which people have very generously continued to support. We actually operate a not-for-profit organisation called From Page to Stage, which we established to help get the front from the page to stage, and it's now becoming an organisation which is going to help support the development of other new Australian works that really also, I guess, foster this cultural, historical, humanitarian significance. We have so many wonderful homegrown stories that just need to be told. So through our not-for-profit, people are able to make donations, and we do have, I can give you some information if you would like to circulate that, if anyone's interested in finding out a little bit more about that. Hopefully within the coming months as well, when we have a bit of a clearer plan as to the actual specifics of the show, there will probably be other opportunities for people to become involved. And certainly a show of this scale will probably require some support through different avenues. Sponsorship will be one, and possibly some investment as well. So I'd be if anyone is interested in finding out more, even just from the purpose of just some information at this stage, be very happy to give you some contact details, and at least we can swap details. I can keep you in the loop.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Maureen, you've got a question.
Last year she sang a major opera, which was basically on the Battle, where New Zealand had its largest number of casualties in Italy during the Second World War, and they built the opera around this particular event. This is something similar. Is this a trend in countries that select a battle and write an opera?
Are you able to rephrase? raise that.
Yeah, so the question has been, I guess, that there was referring to another work that was done in Italy relating to a specific battle there, and whether or not it's a trend to sort of, is it to work around a specific battle and create a sort of a work that tells the story of that particular battle and the relevance to that?
Yes, I might add that the funded by the New Zealand government.
Yeah. Look, I think it is. I think with the centenary at the moment, there, as you're probably aware, last year being 2015 and coinciding with the centenary of Gallipoli, there was a lot of focus on Gallipoli, which was wonderful. A number of TV shows, I think we counted 3, in fact, within sort of 9 months that told the story of Gallipoli specifically. And so there has been quite, I think, I don't want to say from a commercial point of view, but I think from the point of view of attracting an audience, there has certainly been some interesting focus on specific battles. I think when I have written this work, to be honest with you, the Battle of Fromelles was one that I found had some really harrowing stories behind it that I felt just really epitomised a more generic story that really showed the effect of war on Australia, and particularly the Great War as well. So my hope for, in fact, part of the reason we went with a generic name of the front was to, I guess, symbolise that the sense of this great, massive Western Front war that they were going towards, and then would end up in certain particular battles. And in actual fact, I think that the themes that certainly within my show are very universal to most of the battles that occurred over in France. So it's an interesting one because I think that in many ways, I say to people, and it's hard to explain until maybe you've seen the show, but I say to people that a lot of the focus of the story is not actually on the actual specific Battle of Fromelles. That's the backdrop, and that creates the sort of the backstory. This is very much a human story. It's about the families, the effect it had on the families back at home. It's about the effect that it's transcended through a century. And it does also then combine that with some very important, I think, facts and figures that maybe people weren't aware of, and certainly have probably put some contemporary events into perspective for people as well.
Any other questions? Okay, yes?
Put my hand up. I had a grandfather who fought in France in World War I. His son, my uncle, was up turret gunner in World War II. He was awarded the DFC, and he attended a ceremony in Sydney only about 2 weeks ago. And I mention this because of the week with France. There's another turret gunner. Didn't see any time in France. It's all over the top. But the French government awarded a decoration, a Legion of Honour, all of those living servicemen who fought in the European campaign from Australia, not from other countries as well. There were only 14 that attended that ceremony in Sydney, and I imagine it's been emulated in the other states. But I'd share that with you that the French are still recognised the contribution that our soldiers and servicemen made in that field of war. So it's very interesting. My uncle was 92 and quite frail, but quite mentally alert.
Well, actually, just on that very quickly, interestingly, something I didn't talk about today was when we first started getting this project up and running, we had a couple of very wonderful meetings, and we met with our the governor at the time of South Australia, and we were talking a bit about the show and the prospects. And one of the things that came out of it, and one of certainly the big motivations that we had, was to have have something that could actually also provide an educational resource, because I think that one of the huge elements that I really am passionate about is not just telling the story, but also telling the story to our younger generation, who many of whom have been born after our last World War I veteran has died. So there's never been that crossover, and so I think interestingly at that time we found that, cut a long story short, that there were a number of schools that would like to perform the work at the front. We weren't in a position to be able to release the rights of it, so at that time we had enough drafts from previous versions, and that we actually were able to put together a whole new show. And I put together a whole new show which was called Do Not Forget Australia, based on the famous sign at Villiers-Bretonneux, and it actually focuses more on the events of 1918. The only reason I point this out is because just prior to coming here today I had a Skype meeting with the world premiere cast, a primary school of very excited diggers and nurses all dressed up in costume who Skyped they're performing the first version of Do Not Forget Australia tonight in Sydney. So I won't be there, unfortunately, but we have 16 schools across the country performing it over the next 2 years. So
Fantastic. There's one last quick question at the back.
It's not actually a question. Some talking about this a few months ago, the ambassador to France came to Adelaide and ordered about 9 of those regional which is the highest reach order that you can actually ever achieve. And my father was an order for it, so they just on a career man. But the key thing I'm going to say is that the ambassador gave a wonderful speech at the ceremony at the Adelaide Town Hall. And it's a very sobering thing when someone says, in a beautiful French accent, that he wondered if at the age that many Australians went overseas to fight in countries which have nothing to do with Australia, basically, away from their homes, would he have had the courage to do what they did? It's very sobering.
thank you.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Lane. Don't go away yet. I'm sure everyone's enjoyed today's presentation. Certainly a lot to think about at this time on Remembrance Day. And please join me in thanking Dr. Lane Hinchcliffe.